Camilla with her dignity, and the monarchy permanently transformed by the choice that separated love from power. The end.
Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The Queen Consort has done it again, but this time, nobody's celebrating. She spread stories that twisted the truth about the royal family, feeding into their deepest fears and making paranoia spread like wildfire. Britain had experienced royal weddings, shocking public betrayals, family members stepping away, and even the death of a beloved king. But nothing could have prepared the nation for what King Charles was about to say out loud. With Camilla just rooms away and the most important family members sitting frozen in silence, the monarch dropped a bombshell that would shake the entire palace to its foundation. Camilla would stop being queen, and everything about her future next to the crown had completely changed forever. Charles understood the stakes better than anyone. William sat next to Catherine, taking in every word, while Princess Anne and Prince Edward clutched sealed folders with Camilla's name written on them. Everyone had left their phones outside the room, and guards stood blocking every exit. The meeting was supposed to be about the Constitution and keeping the monarchy stable, but those folders told a much darker story. The king held up the official order, and his hands shook as he spoke. He announced that his wife would end all her royal duties, would stop being seen as the monarchy's main female representative, and would retreat into...
Once again, the Queen of Consorts surprises us, but not in a good way.
Made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
The Queen Consort has done it again, but this time, nobody's celebrating. She spread stories that twisted the truth about the royal family, feeding into their deepest fears and making paranoia spread like wildfire. Britain had experienced royal weddings, shocking public betrayals, family members stepping away, and even the death of a beloved king. But nothing could have prepared the nation for what King Charles was about to say out loud. With Camilla just rooms away and the most important family members sitting frozen in silence, the monarch dropped a bombshell that would shake the entire palace to its foundation. Camilla would stop being queen, and everything about her future next to the crown had completely changed forever. Charles understood the stakes better than anyone. William sat next to Catherine, taking in every word, while Princess Anne and Prince Edward clutched sealed folders with Camilla's name written on them. Everyone had left their phones outside the room, and guards stood blocking every exit. The meeting was supposed to be about the Constitution and keeping the monarchy stable, but those folders told a much darker story. The king held up the official order, and his hands shook as he spoke. He announced that his wife would end all her royal duties, would stop being seen as the monarchy's main female representative, and would retreat into a smaller, private life for the rest of his time as king. William watched his father struggle through each word with obvious pain. The future king had watched him survive terrible private moments before, but this decision cut something deep inside him. Catherine looked toward William, realizing this announcement would completely reshape what came next for everyone, including Camilla's entire world. Anne didn't move a muscle, but she noticed another piece of paper hidden beneath her brother's hand. He was keeping something secret, something that suggested the real reason behind this decision was even more devastating than what they'd just heard. Camilla sat completely still when a staff member brought her the news in her private rooms. She grabbed the arm of her chair with white knuckles and demanded to know if Charles had personally reviewed and approved every single word. The answer came soft and quiet. He had. The Queen Consort stared at the closed door, then back down at the notice, hunting for any language that might somehow make forgiveness possible. There was nothing there. This order was final, permanent, unchangeable. Nobody had suggested a temporary break or a future review, and there was no way back to what she used to have. She stood up, placed the paper down carefully, and started walking toward where the king was waiting in his private rooms. William caught sight of her moving, and he immediately knew what was about to happen. His father had made this decision wearing the crown, but Camilla was about to confront him as his wife. The entire country was trying to figure out what Charles had taken from Camilla, but the people inside the palace knew the real question was different. What would each member of this family have to lose, give up, or reveal? Behind all the titles stood 5 people connected by blood, marriage, duty, and decades of pain that nobody had ever properly addressed. Charles had made the announcement as king, but he couldn't escape escape from the woman whose entire future he'd just destroyed. Camilla had fought through public hatred just to reach the throne, and now her own husband was pushing her away from it. William stood between them, knowing that one single wrong word could turn a royal decision into a family war that could never be fixed. Charles was alone after everyone left. He took off his glasses, pressed his fingers hard against his eyes, and looked down at the official declaration he'd signed. The crown demands stability above everything else, not because of the person wearing it, but because of what the title represents. Yet the king understood that stability had come with a real cost. He'd defended Camilla through scandal, fought everyone who attacked her, and protected her for years. Now he'd become the one person who could take everything away. She'd once been someone waiting outside palace walls, looking in from the cold. Becoming queen had meant survival, belonging, and total victory after suffering through years of humiliation and shame. Losing that place wasn't just a change in what she had to do, it felt like he was throwing her away. Camilla wouldn't accept any help from her staff. She sat next to those folders and told her assistant she would only talk to Charles, nobody else. The queen consort had trusted him to protect her when everyone was angry at her, and she couldn't understand why that protection had crumbled now. Outside that room, William stood with his hand raised toward the door, hesitating. He carried old resentment about her position, but hearing her voice crack in pain left him torn between anger and compassion. He dropped his hand without knocking. Charles was falling apart in one room while his wife waited alone in another. The future king couldn't protect either one of them without betraying the other. Catherine felt the danger the moment an assistant handed her the new schedule for her appearances. A list of ceremonial responsibilities that had once belonged to Camilla was now being assigned to her. Catherine knew immediately why this transfer mattered so much. Every single event she appeared at would make people think she'd climbed up by stepping on another woman's back. She told William she wanted absolutely no celebrating of this change, and he agreed, understanding that saying nothing might still be misread as wanting this all along. Anne pulled her nephew aside privately and warned him that this crisis didn't spring from one argument about rules. During a royal ceremony, Camilla had broken through a boundary that Charles had explicitly told everyone to respect. The Princess Royal explained that written records proved exactly why her brother couldn't defend Camilla's position anymore. To understand why the king would wound the woman he'd supported through almost his entire adult life, the family had to go back to the moment when one quiet action turned tension into total betrayal. The situation didn't start with shouting or arguments. It began with a chair, a sealed written order, and a ceremonial event that was never supposed to get this much attention. Only a small group of royals were in the room when Camilla made the choice that changed absolutely everything. Charles had given direct instructions about the future direction of the monarchy. Camilla understood those instructions. William understood them too. But when the moment came to actually follow through, she ignored what the king had ordered and forced him to face a fear he'd buried deep down for years. Bad feelings had been building for a long time before this moment at Windsor. Camilla had been pushing to keep loyal people in important positions, with royal connections and places in ceremonies. Charles was worried that different royal branches were starting to compete for power at exactly the same time William and Catherine were getting closer to eventually taking over. The king needed everything organized under one clear chain of command, but his wife was terrified that clarity would make her disappear and become invisible. Camilla made that fear come alive during an investiture event at Windsor Castle where honors are formally presented. Charles had left an official, sealed instruction saying Catherine should have the central chair during the meeting. But the queen consort sat down in that chair before anyone else arrived and told the staff member who asked her to move that she wasn't going anywhere. Catherine stood frozen in the doorway. She didn't say a single word. Camilla kept both hands gripping the chair's arms, forcing everyone to see the challenge being made without speaking one word. When William came in later and saw his wife standing aside, anger exploded through him. The prince thought this was a direct attack designed to reduce Catherine's future importance. But Catherine's silence told him not to turn this insult into total warfare. Charles pulled Camilla aside after the ceremony to talk privately. He asked why she'd completely ignored his direct order. In a report that palace officials documented, she answered that she wasn't going to become invisible just because the next generation was getting impatient to take over. The king heard something much scarier than just disobedience. He heard a threat that his marriage and his plan for succession were now working against each other. Anne made that fear even worse when she handed her brother a file showing earlier orders that people in Camilla's household had changed, delayed, or twisted to mean something different. The Princess Royal then pointed to the name card that had been switched out. Someone had prepared this whole challenge before anyone even walked in the door. Charles called Camilla to his study with nobody else there to hear their conversation. He put the changed seating chart on the table between them and waited for the door to shut tight. The chair at Windsor had uncovered the real struggle, but it was inside the king's locked study, far away from everyone else, that his marriage, his power, and the future of the entire crown finally crashed together. Charles didn't yell when Camilla entered his study. That actually made it scarier and more terrible. The altered seating plan sat on the desk between them. The crossed out names carried all the weight of an accusation that neither could soften or explain away. She was ready for anger. What she found instead was heartbreak. Then the king asked something that destroyed every title, every wall she'd built, and every memory she'd carefully protected. Charles wanted one answer. Had the Windsor change been a simple mistake, a direct act of defiance, or part of a larger plan to protect Camilla's influence and power? The king had defended her through scandal, hostility, and years of real danger. She had walked in believing history would still protect her. He had walked in knowing that love could no longer fix what duty had put in their way. Charles pushed the seating plan across the desk toward her and asked if she had ordered Catherine's name to be removed. The document showed who would sit where during every ceremonial event, so every single name mattered and carried deep meaning. Camilla admitted she'd known the central chair had been reserved for Catherine. The queen consort argued that giving up every sign of seniority would leave her as queen in nothing but title alone. She'd fought way too hard and suffered way too much to reach this position, and she could feel their future slipping away from her in real time. Charles responded with words she had never expected. He said the throne was never created to prove their love for each other. The king still loved her deeply, but as the person carrying the crown and constitutional responsibility, he couldn't let his personal feelings override the future of succession. Camilla flinched hard. She took off her royal brooch and placed it right beside the document. A royal brooch signals status and belonging at official events. She told him he couldn't ask her to wear symbols of power while refusing to let her actually use that power. Charles opened the file Anne had given him. It contained official documented records proving that Camilla's office had unauthorized contact with ceremonial planners, proving the Windsor change had been planned and coordinated. She accused William's household of creating evidence against her. The king stopped her right there. His son hadn't made the final recommendation that led to this moment. He had made it. That admission shattered her final defense and last hope for mercy. Camilla stood up without begging for forgiveness. She left the brooch on the desk, closed the door, and didn't look back at him. Charles waited until her footsteps disappeared completely, then pushed the private bell to call his staff. When his constitutional secretary arrived, the monarch ordered an official, permanent declaration that would reduce her role significantly. The marriage had weathered disgrace, fought through opposition, and survived decades of judgment from people everywhere. But once Charles transformed their private conflict into a formal official order, the struggle shifted from emotion to pure authority and power. A king could sign a declaration by himself, but no royal change could survive on just one signature alone. Behind Charles's announcement was a quiet alliance formed between people who had reached the exact same conclusion but for very different reasons. William wanted stability in the monarchy. Anne wanted consequences and discipline. Catherine wanted protection from a conflict she'd never asked to be a part of. But when they sat down around the long table, each one understood that reducing Camilla's role would transform not only her future, but their own futures as well. Charles took his seat without any ceremony or fanfare. The constitutional secretary explained that Camilla's legal marriage couldn't be erased completely, but her public duties, household authority, ceremonial standing, and access to royal benefits could all be restructured and changed. William, Anne, Edward, and Catherine had been brought in because they would have to take on the duties, face the public pressure, and deal with the private anger that this change would create. The king understood this decision wouldn't stay inside one household. It was going to shift the entire balance of the entire family structure. Catherine looked at the proposed new schedule and froze completely. Her name appeared next to ceremonies Camilla had fully expected to lead and control. The princess understood the danger right away. Every new responsibility assigned to her could be presented to people as proof that she'd wanted another woman to suffer and fall. William leaned forward and said absolutely that his wife must never look like she demanded this transfer. The prince was terrified that the public's sympathy for Camilla would turn into suspicion and anger against Catherine, destroying the future they were supposed to build together. Catherine agreed, but her worry grew deeper as each reassigned duty made everything more personal. Anne turned away from Charles and refused to make the truth any softer or easier. Protecting Camilla from consequences, Anne said, would weaken the crown and destroy his credibility as king. The Princess Royal reminded her brother that real authority only survives when the same rules apply to people closest to the sovereign, including family members. He listened without arguing against it. Edward stayed beside them, knowing that several duties would be moving to him as well, and his silence proved that the alliance was completely real, not just theoretical. The advisors then shared the harshest conditions of all. Camilla's household appointments and public events would require permission and approval from the king's central office, meaning Charles's staff would control everything she was allowed to do going forward. Charles signed a second instruction that prevented any reversal, no matter what happened with illness, outside pressure, or requests for a temporary pause. He placed the pen down, looked directly at William, and warned that a future monarch must never confuse personal feelings with constitutional responsibility and duty. Minutes later, Camilla's senior assistant got orders to clear out her office suite before the sun went down that day. Before the entire palace could even process what had happened, the signatures on those papers were silent, but the consequences were absolutely anything but silent. By the time Camilla's household received its first new instructions, her entire former world had already started disappearing around her completely. The first sign of Camilla's new reality wasn't a news headline or an official public statement. It was an empty schedule that said nothing. Her appearances disappeared. Briefing folders stopped arriving. People who'd been in her rooms every single morning to help her were sent somewhere else without any explanation at all. Then came the order to clear out the office where she'd exercised royal influence and power. Camilla walked into her office and stopped dead in her tracks. Archival boxes were stacked beside the desk, ready for a life she'd never agreed to pack away. An assistant explained that the rooms had to be completely cleared before evening came. The queen consort refused to touch a single thing. Packing these objects herself would mean she was accepting Charles's judgment, and she wasn't ready to hand him that victory. Her court calendar, which listed every royal appearance she was supposed to make, had already been completely emptied. Invitations that required the queen had been reassigned to others or postponed, while her communications people got orders to send every statement through the central palace office instead. This change mattered because her household had once had its own authority. Now even her words needed permission to be spoken. The assistant started removing framed photographs without saying a word.